I'm Jessica Parker, 28, an elementary school teacher visiting my grandfather Harold for his 85th birthday at Sunset Ridge, his upscale retirement community. We sat in his sunlit apartment when he casually asked, "How do you spend your trust fund, Jesse? The $3,400,000 should be more than enough for a nice life." I nearly choked on my tea, my mind racing. What trust fund? I'd been working 2 jobs since college to pay off student loans. What trust fund, Grandpa? The confusion in his eyes matched mine. Before diving into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit like and subscribe if you've ever received unexpected news that completely turned your life upside down. "The trust fund I set up when you were born, Jessica," Grandpa Harold replied, his bushy white eyebrows furrowing. "You've had access since turning 25. Don't tell me you haven't been receiving the distributions." My heart pounded against my ribs. Was this confusion, early dementia? The doctors had said Grandpa was sharp as ever at his last checkup. "Grandpa, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I don't have a trust fund. I've never had access to any significant money." His face transformed from confusion to concern. "That's impossible. I set it up myself after selling Parker Industries. Your parents are the trustees until you reach 25. The sunlight streaming through his window suddenly felt too bright, the room too warm. My mind flashed to my childhood in our modest, split-level house in Mapleton. Nothing fancy, just a middle-class neighborhood with decent school. I remembered my mother Miranda's constant refrain about budgets and saving my father Thomas's tired eyes after working overtime at the insurance company. "There must be a mistake," I insisted, thinking of my cramped one-bedroom apartment that consumed nearly half my teacher's salary. I worked all through college at the campus bookstore and waited tables on weekends. I still have $42 0-inches student loans. Grandpa's face darkened. "You shouldn't have a penny of student debt. The trust was specifically set up to cover your education and give you a start in life." I excused myself to the bathroom, hands trembling, as I called my mother. "Mom, I'm at Grandpa's place, and he's talking about some trust fund he set up for me for $3 million. A long pause followed. Too long. "Mom, your grandfather is confused, Jessica. You know how he gets with numbers sometimes," she replied, her voice oddly tight. "He seems perfectly lucid, Mom, and he's pretty specific about the details. We'll discuss this later." Not on the phone. Something in her tone sent a cold sensation down my spine. When I returned to the living room, Grandpa was waiting with his tablet open to a banking site. "See for yourself," he said, handing it to me. "This is just the quarterly statement summary." The screen showed account balances, transaction histories, and investment portfolios, all with my name listed as beneficiary. The numbers made me dizzy. Current balance $1,3264,127. Previous balance $3,412578.32. "I don't understand," I whispered, staring at the dramatic decrease in funds. "If this is real, where did $2 million go?" Grandpa's hands trembled slightly. "That's what I'd like to know. The trust was set up with specific provisions: education, housing, medical expenses. My attorney, Richard Bennett, has managed the investments, but your parents were trustees with limited administrative access." My throat tightened. The timeline of withdrawals started approximately 7 years ago when I was 21 and struggling through my junior year of college. Large sums disappeared regularly, accelerating over the past 3 years. "I need to talk to my parents," I said, gathering my purse with unsteady hands. Grandpa nodded gravely. "I think that's wise, Jessica. And perhaps you should speak with Richard as well. I'll text you his contact information." The drive from Sunset Ridge to my parents' house took 30 minutes, but my mind raced through 28 years of memories. The camping trips instead of overseas vacations, the community college courses I took in high school to save money, the ancient Honda I drove until it finally died last year, my mother's constant remarks about financial responsibility while I pinched pennies to make rent. Had it all been a lie? I parked in their driveway, noticing things I'd never questioned before. The house wasn't extravagant, but it was fully paid off, something unusual among my parents' friends. The tasteful landscaping, the newer model cars, small luxuries I'd attributed to careful saving and my father's recent promotion. They were sitting in the living room when I entered without knocking. "Jessica, what's wrong?" my father asked, looking up from his newspaper. I held up my phone with the photos I'd taken of Grandpa's tablet screen. Is there a trust fund in my name worth over $3 million that you've been accessing without my knowledge? The color drained from my father's face. My mother's expression hardened. Your grandfather has no right to interfere in our family finances, she said coldly. That's not an answer, Mom. My father set down his newspaper, not meeting my eyes. It's complicated, Jesse. Then uncomplicate it for me, Dad. I snapped, my voice breaking. Have you been stealing money that was meant for me? We never stole anything, my mother hissed. That money was family money. But it wasn't in your name, was it? It was in mine. The silence confirmed what I already knew. How could you? I whispered. I worked 30-hour weekends during finals. I took out loans. I skipped doctor visits because I couldn't afford the copay. We're your parents, my mother said defensively. We made decisions for the family. My father finally looked up, guilt written across his face. It started small, just borrowing against the fund for a few expenses. We always intended to pay it back. What expenses? I demanded. They exchanged glances. The investment property in Colorado, my father admitted. Some of our retirement accounts. The kitchen remodel. Each word felt like a physical blow. While I ate ramen noodles and worked midnight shifts, they were renovating their kitchen with my money. The trust was irresponsibly large, my mother interjected. Harold, spoiling you like that would have ruined your work ethic. We protected you from becoming entitled by stealing from me. My voice rose. By watching me struggle and say nothing, I had to drop out of the master's program because I couldn't afford it. The memory of that particular heartbreak hit hard. My dream of educational administration abandoned because the program wouldn't allow part-time enrollment and I couldn't afford to stop working. We made decisions we thought were best, my father said weakly. I laughed bitterly. Best for whom? Best for your vacation home, for Mom's luxury SUV. Now you're just being vindictive, my mother snapped. Am I? Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't watch me work myself to exhaustion for years, while you had access to millions that were legally mine. Neither could meet my eyes. I walked out, tears blurring my vision, ignoring their calls to come back and talk reasonably. There was nothing reasonable about this betrayal. That night in a hotel room I could barely afford, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process how my entire understanding of my life and family had shattered in a single afternoon. The following morning, I returned to my parents' house, eyes swollen from crying, armed with more questions. They were waiting for me, tension visible in their postures as I entered the living room. I need to know everything, I stated flatly. No more lies. My mother folded her arms defensively. You're making this into something malicious, Jessica. We're your parents. We did what we thought was best. Miranda, my father, interjected. She deserves the truth. The truth, I echoed. Like how much of my trust fund you've taken. My father's shoulders slumped. Approximately $2.1 million. The number hung in the air between us, staggering in its magnitude. How could you possibly justify that? I whispered. Your grandfather's money corrupted him, my mother declared, with surprising venom. He lorded his success over our family for years. That money was our due as much as yours. That's not true, Miranda, my father countered tiredly. Harold was always generous with us. We just wanted more than we could afford. So you took it from me. I felt sick. Show me the records. I want to see where my money went. Reluctantly, my father retrieved a laptop and logged into an account I'd never seen. Years of transactions appeared on the screen, withdrawals starting small but growing increasingly larger. This withdrawal of $48,000 pointed at a transaction from 7 years ago. What was that for? My father couldn't meet my eyes. The down payment on the lake house. And this one, for $127,000. Your mother's retirement investment account. Each revelation felt like another betrayal. I scrolled through years of their financial decisions made with money that should have funded my education, my first home, my future. What about this? I pointed to a series of regular withdrawals. Monthly distributions, my mother said dismissively. For family expenses. Family expenses, I repeated. Like when you bought that Lexus while I was driving a car that broke down every other week, or when you remodeled your kitchen while I was eating ramen for dinner. Specific memories flooded back with painful clarity. The summer after sophomore year, when I worked double shifts at a diner while my parents took a Mediterranean cruise. The Christmas, they surprised each other with expensive gifts while giving me a $50 gift card with a lecture about budgeting. My graduation dinner, where they commented on my irresponsible student loan debt. I had to drop out of my master's program because I couldn't afford it, I said quietly. Did you take a nice vacation that year with my money? That's not fair, Jessica, my mother snapped. Fair, I laughed bitterly. You want to talk about fair? I've been killing myself, working overtime, skipping doctor appointments, postponing having a family because I couldn't afford it. Meanwhile, you've been living off my trust fund while watching me struggle. Tell me how that's fair. We're your parents, my mother insisted. We sacrificed everything for you. What exactly did you sacrifice? I demanded. Because from where I'm standing, you've been living quite comfortably at my expense. My father finally broke. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he admitted, his voice cracking. It started with small amounts, your college tuition payments that we diverted. We told ourselves we deserved some compensation for raising you. Thomas, my mother hissed. No, Miranda. She needs to hear this. He turned back to me. Then we used some for the lake house down payment. It was supposed to be a family property anyway. But then your mother's business failed and we used the fund to cover those losses. Then my investment mistakes. Then the renovations. It just spiraled. And you never thought to tell me, to ask me, my voice broke. I'm your daughter. We were going to pay it back, he insisted weakly. With what money, I asked. You've spent millions. The silence answered my question. How did you even access the funds, I asked. Wouldn't I have needed to sign something? My parents exchanged glances. Your signatures were managed, my father admitted. You forged my signature. That's fraud. It wasn't like that, my mother insisted. We were authorized as trustees until you were 25. And after I turned 25, what was your justification then? Neither answered. I stood up, unable to bear their presence any longer. I trusted you my entire life. I believed every word when you talked about financial responsibility and living within our means, all while you were stealing my future from me. Jessica, please, my father reached for me. Donnie stepped back. I can't even look at you right now. I left their house feeling hollowed out memories of my childhood, now tainted by this betrayal. The financial struggles that shaped my identity, my work ethic, my very perception of the world, all based on a lie. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a text from my grandfather. Richard Bennett is expecting your call. He'll help make this right. At least someone in my family was on my side. Richard Bennett's office occupied the 12th floor of a downtown high-rise, all-glass chrome and quiet efficiency. The attorney was older than I expected, with silver hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. Your grandfather called me yesterday, he said after we exchanged introductions. I've been managing the Parker family accounts for nearly 30 years, including your trust. I only learned about its existence yesterday, I replied. His expression darkened. That's highly concerning, Miss Parker. You should have been fully briefed on the trust when you turned 25. That clearly didn't happen. He nodded, grimly turning to his computer. The Harold Parker Family Trust was established when you were born. Your grandfather funded it with proceeds from the sale of Parker Industries, approximately $3 million initially. With investments and growth, it reached just over $4 million by the time you turned 18. The figures made me dizzy. The trust stipulated that your parents would serve as trustees until you reach 25 with authority to disperse funds for your education, healthcare, and general welfare. At 25, control would transfer entirely to you with advisory oversight from this firm. But that never happened, I said. No. According to our records, your parents submitted documentation indicating you wished to maintain the existing arrangement. He retrieved a file and showed me a document bearing what appeared to be my signature. I never signed this, I stated flatly. Richard's expression became grave. I was afraid of that. This constitutes fraud. Over the next 2 hours, Richard pulled records of every transaction from the trust over the past decade. The pattern was unmistakable, modest educational expense withdrawals during my high school years, then increasingly large and frequent withdrawals beginning in my sophomore year of college. What's this $215,000 withdrawal from 3 years ago, I asked. Richard checked the supporting documentation. It was categorized as beneficiary housing expenses. The funds were used to purchase a property in Vail, Colorado. My parents' vacation home purchased the same year I was living in an apartment with 3 roommates because I couldn't afford rent alone. And these monthly withdrawals of $8,000 listed as beneficiary living expenses, Richard replied, frowning. I laughed bitterly. My living expenses have never approached that amount. I make $52,000 a year teaching. By the end of our meeting, Richard had compiled a comprehensive record of misappropriated funds, totaling approximately $2.1 million funds that should have provided me financial security and opportunities. What are my options? I asked finally. You have several, Richard replied carefully. This is a clear case of fiduciary breach and fraud. Criminal charges could be pursued. Alternatively, we could handle this as a civil matter to recover misappropriated funds. The word criminal made my stomach lurch. Despite everything, these were still my parents. I need time to think, I said. Of course. However, I recommend we immediately freeze the remaining trust assets to prevent further withdrawals. We should also schedule a meeting with your parents and their legal representation. I nodded, numbly authorizing the necessary paperwork. 3 days later, I sat across from my parents in Richard's conference room. My mother had brought her brother, my Uncle James, who was a corporate attorney. My father looked diminished somehow, while my mother maintained her defensive posture. Let's be clear about what's happened, Richard began. Thomas and Miranda Parker, as trustees, have systematically misappropriated approximately $2.1 million from Jessica's trust fund over 7 years. After Jessica turned 25, they continued accessing these funds through fraudulent documentation. These are serious accusations. Uncle James responded smoothly. The Parkers have always acted with Jessica's best interests in mind. By stealing her inheritance, Richard countered. By managing family resources appropriately, my mother interjected. I couldn't stay silent. How exactly was buying a vacation home in my best interest when I was working 60-hour weeks and drowning in student debt? My father at least had the decency to look ashamed. My mother's expression hardened. You've always been financially irresponsible, Jessica. We protected that money from your immaturity. By spending it yourselves, I shot back. The meeting deteriorated from there. Uncle James attempted to frame the situation as a misunderstanding about family finances. Richard methodically dismantled this argument with documented evidence of fraud. My father eventually broke down, admitting they had knowingly misused the trust. We have substantial debt beyond what you're aware of, he confessed, ignoring my mother's warning glare. The house equity line credit cards, Miranda's failed business ventures. We used the trust to cover those holes, always believing things would turn around. After the meeting, I consulted with a separate attorney, Diana Reeves, who specialized in financial fraud cases. Her assessment was blunt. This is straightforward embezzlement and fraud, she explained. The forged documents after you turned 25 elevate this to potential criminal charges. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on most of these transactions. What would happen if I pursued criminal charges? I asked. Your parents would likely face felony charges. Given the amount involved, prison time is a real possibility, especially for the more recent fraudulent activities. The thought made me physically ill. Over the following weeks, the betrayal extended beyond my parents. At a family dinner with my mother's sister, Aunt Susan, I discovered she had known about the trust. I assumed you were choosing to let them manage it, she admitted uncomfortably. It wasn't my place to interfere. Even more painful was learning my cousin Megan's destination wedding, which I couldn't afford to attend, had been partially funded by my parents as a gift. Did you know where that money came from? I asked her. Her hesitation told me everything. I thought it was from the sale of Grandpa's company, she said finally. I didn't know it was specifically your money, but she hadn't questioned the generosity, even knowing my financial struggles. With each revelation, my isolation deepened. The family I thought I knew had participated in or willingly overlooked this betrayal. The only person who seemed truly disturbed by what had happened was my grandfather, who called daily to check on me. I should have been more vigilant, he said repeatedly. I trusted your father to honor his responsibilities. It's not your fault, Grandpa, I assured him, though part of me wondered how this had continued for so long without oversight. As legal proceedings began, I felt increasingly alone in a battle against the people who should have protected me most. The weeks following the legal meetings blurred together. I took sick leave from teaching, unable to focus on lesson plans while my life unraveled. Friends called and texted, concerned about my sudden withdrawal, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How do you tell someone your parents stole millions from you while watching you struggle financially for years? Sleep became elusive. When I did drift off, I'd wake abruptly, mind racing with calculations of what my life could have been without unnecessary hardship. The small apartment I'd been proud to afford now felt like a monument to their deception. Dr. Mitchell, the therapist I started seeing on Diana's recommendation, helped me name what I was experiencing: grief. "You're mourning the loss of the family you thought you had," she explained during our third session, "and the life you might have lived without financial strain." I keep thinking about specific moments I admitted, like when I got accepted to Northwestern for my master's program but had to decline because I couldn't afford it. Mom and Dad said it was financially irresponsible to take on more debt. While they were spending your money, Dr. Mitchell noted. That same month, they renovated their kitchen. $40,000 for custom cabinets. The memories still burned. I remember crying in my car after telling the admission office I couldn't attend, then going to their house for dinner and having to admire their new granite countertops. Anger became my constant companion, simmering beneath every interaction. Dr. Mitchell encouraged me to express it in our sessions rather than suppress it. They didn't just take my money, I told her, during a particularly difficult session. They took my choices, my opportunities, years of my life spent working instead of pursuing goals. They watched me struggle and said nothing. Painful memories continued surfacing. My parents discouraging me from studying abroad because it was impractical financially. Their lectures about my poor money management when I struggled with rent increases. Their criticism of my modest ambitions when I chose teaching over higher-paying careers. I shaped my entire life around a financial reality that was a lie, I realized aloud. One afternoon, I visited my grandfather at his retirement community. His health had noticeably declined since this ordeal began. His normally robust presence, diminished by stress and heartbreak. "I keep asking myself where I went wrong with your father," he said as we sat in his sunny living room. "I thought I taught him better values than this." "It's not your fault, Grandpa. I set up that trust to give you opportunities, Jessica, to free you from financial worry so you could pursue your passions." His voice caught. Instead, it became a source of such betrayal. He shared family history I'd never heard before, how he'd grown up poor, built Parker Industries from nothing, sold it for a fortune at 60, and carefully planned his legacy through trusts for his family members. "Your father always seemed uncomfortable with money discussions," he reflected. In retrospect, perhaps that was a warning sign. From my grandfather, I learned about my father's gambling issues in his 20s and my mother's pattern of living beyond their means throughout their marriage. "I should have maintained closer oversight," he lamented. The crisis point came unexpectedly at my cousin Megan's wedding reception 2 months after my discovery. I declined to attend the ceremony, but agreed to make an appearance at the reception, hoping to maintain some family normalcy. It was a mistake. My entrance created an immediate tension. Relatives who had been avoiding my calls suddenly became intensely interested in the centerpieces. My parents kept their distance, my father looking miserable, my mother coolly poised. Uncle James approached after I'd been there 20 minutes. "Jessica, I hope we can keep today pleasant. It's Megan's special day. I'm not planning to cause a scene," I replied stiffly. "Good. Your parents are having a difficult time. This family matter should stay private." "Family matter," I echoed incredulously. "You mean the felony fraud?" "Your grandfather's wealth has always complicated family dynamics," he said dismissively. "You're young. Eventually, you'll understand that family finances are never black and white." Something in his condescending tone broke my last restraint. "They stole $2 million from me," I said, my voice rising. "They forged my signature. They watched me struggle financially for years while spending my money on vacations and luxury items. Tell me what's complicated about that." Conversations around us stopped. Uncle James looked uncomfortable. "Jessica, you're making a scene," he warned. "I'm stating facts. Facts that everyone in this family has conveniently ignored while benefiting from my trust fund." My mother appeared at Uncle James's side. "This is inappropriate, Jessica. You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself," I laughed incredulously. "That's rich coming from someone facing potential criminal charges for stealing from their own child." The reception hall fell silent. Aunt Susan attempted intervention, placing a hand on my arm. "Sweetie, today isn't the time." "When is the time?" "When it's convenient. When it doesn't disrupt the family pretense that everything's normal." I pulled away from her. None of you said a word while they spent millions that were meant for my education and future. You all just accepted their lies. My voice broke as I continued. Some of you even took their gifts. Gifts bought with my stolen money while watching me work multiple jobs and struggle with student loans. So excuse me if I don't care about ruining the party mood. I left the reception in tears, ignoring calls to come back and talk reasonably. Alone in my apartment that night, surrounded by IKEA furniture I'd carefully budgeted for, I reached my emotional rock bottom. The foundations of my life, my family relationships, my understanding of my own history, my hard-earned identity as someone who overcame financial challenges through determination, all lay in ruins around me. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully comprehend what had been taken from me, not just money, but trust opportunities, and years I could never reclaim. The anger that had sustained me gave way to a profound grief that felt bottomless. The district attorney's office was exactly as intimidating as crime shows portrayed, all polished surfaces and serious expressions. Ada Kevin Warner reviewed the evidence Diana and Richard had compiled, his expression growing increasingly grave. Ms. Parker, based on these documents, we have sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges against both your parents. The dollar amount places this in felony territory with potential sentences of 5 to 15 years if convicted. The clinical way he discussed my parents potentially going to prison made my stomach clench despite my anger. What specifically would they be charged with? I asked. Multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and financial exploitation, he replied, turning a page in the file. The case is particularly strong for activities after you turn 25, when they forged documents to maintain access to your trust. Diana, sitting beside me, added, "The evidence is overwhelming, Jessica. Bank records, forged documents, the paper trail of purchases clearly benefiting only your parents." I nodded numbly. And if they're convicted? Ada Warner didn't sugarcoat it. Given the amount involved and the duration of the fraud, incarceration is likely, particularly for the more recent offenses. The thought of my parents in prison, my father with his heart condition, my mother with her carefully maintained image, was difficult to reconcile with the justice I sought. "I need time to consider this," I said finally. Outside the DA's office, Diana was direct. "Jessica, pursuing criminal charges is entirely your decision. However, regardless of what you decide on that front, we should continue with civil proceedings to recover whatever assets remain." Over the following weeks, my parents made increasingly desperate attempts to communicate. My father left voicemails full of tearful apologies. My mother oscillated between defensive justifications and pleas to keep this within the family. Extended family members became unwelcome intermediaries. Aunt Susan called to suggest I was being vindictive. Uncle James emphasized the permanent damage criminal charges would do to the family. Even cousins I'd been close with growing up urged me to find an amicable resolution. None acknowledged the permanent damage already done to me. Diana presented the full accounting of misappropriated funds during our next meeting. The itemized list read like a catalog of my parents' lifestyle, upgrades, and financial irresponsibility: $420,000 for the Vale property, $68,000 for my mother's failed boutique business, $184,000 for my father's investment losses, $42,000 for the kitchen renovation, $62,000 for luxury vehicles, $112,000 for various vacations, $96,000 for my parents' credit card debt, $384,000 for their retirement accounts, $732,000 regular monthly withdrawals, classified as family expenses. The remaining trust balance of approximately $1.3 million represented less than half the original amount, with accumulated growth. How much could realistically be recovered? I asked. That depends on how aggressively we pursue recovery, Diana explained. The Vale property could be liquidated. Retirement accounts are more complicated, but potentially accessible given the fraudulent source of funds. Personal assets could be seized. They'd lose everything, I realized. They spent your inheritance, Jessica, Diana reminded me gently. Money specifically designated for your future. My grandfather's health took a concerning turn amid these developments. I visited him at the hospital after a stress-induced cardiac episode. "This isn't how I wanted things to play out," he said weakly, the hospital monitors beeping steadily beside him. "I never meant for my money to tear the family apart." "This isn't about the money, Grandpa," I told him, holding his hand. "It's about the betrayal. The lies." He nodded sadly. "Money doesn't create character flaws, Jessica. It just reveals them." After a thoughtful pause, he added, "Whatever you decide about your parents, remember that your life isn't defined by this betrayal. Don't let bitterness consume your future the way they consumed your trust fund." His perspective gave me pause. What did I truly want from this situation? Justice, certainly. Accountability, absolutely. But prison time for my parents, financial ruin, the permanent fracturing of my entire family. I consulted Dr. Mitchell about my conflicted feelings. Many victims of financial exploitation, particularly by family members, struggle with this exact dilemma, she explained. There's no single right answer. The question is, what outcome would best facilitate your healing process? After weeks of deliberation, consultations with my legal team, and soul-searching, I made my decision. I called a settlement negotiation meeting with my parents and their attorneys. The conference room felt charged with tension as we assembled. My father looked physically diminished, gray-faced, and nervous. My mother maintained her composure, though the strain showed around her eyes. Before we begin, I said, I want to be clear about something. I'm not interested in discussing family loyalty or keeping matters private. Those arguments lost their validity when you chose to steal from me for 7 years. I laid out my terms: full financial transparency, a legally binding repayment agreement for a significant portion of the misappropriated funds, the immediate sale of the Vale property, and my father's acceptance of felony charges with a plea arrangement avoiding prison time. In exchange, I concluded I won't pursue maximum criminal penalties or completely liquidate your assets. But this agreement requires complete honesty moving forward. One more lie, one hidden account or asset, and all deals are off. My mother started to protest, but my father stopped her. "We accept," he said quietly. "All of it." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was one I could live with, a balance between justice and mercy that would allow me to move forward. 6 months after the settlement agreement, I stood in my newly purchased condominium, modest but entirely mine, funded by a portion of the recovered trust money. The journey to this point had been arduous, with legal proceedings, family tensions, and my own emotional healing process converging into a new chapter of my life. Dr. Mitchell had been instrumental in helping me process the complex grief and anger. "Healing isn't linear," she reminded me during one session. "You'll have good days and difficult days. Both are valid." The legal resolution had proceeded largely as planned. My father accepted a felony fraud charge with a suspended sentence contingent on adhering to the repayment agreement. My mother was required to complete community service and financial counseling. The Vale property had been sold with proceeds returning to my trust. My relationship with my parents had transformed into something carefully structured. We communicated through limited scheduled interactions, brief phone calls, and occasional supervised visits. Each conversation remained tightly bounded by new rules: no financial discussions without attorneys present, no attempts to minimize or reframe what had happened, no pressure to move past this quickly for the family's sake. My mother struggled with these boundaries, still attempting to control narratives and deflect responsibility. My father, however, seemed genuinely remorseful, attending therapy and respecting the limitations I'd established. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right," he told me during one of our carefully arranged coffee meetings. "I know I can never fully repair what I broke." The remaining trust funds, approximately $1.3 million plus recovered assets, now stood firmly under my control, with Richard Bennett's firm providing legitimate financial guidance. I approached this newfound wealth with caution, mindful of its complicated history. First came the practical steps: paying off my student loans, which felt surreal after years of watching the balance barely decrease despite regular payment. I made modest improvements to my living situation, moving from my cramped apartment to a small but comfortable condominium closer to my school. Most importantly, I established a strict financial plan that balanced immediate quality of life improvements with long-term security. No extravagant purchases, no radical lifestyle changes, just the freedom from constant financial anxiety that should have been mine years ago. My relationship with my grandfather strengthened through this ordeal. I visited him weekly at Sunset Ridge, where his health had stabilized following the resolution of legal proceedings. I'm learning more about our family history from him, I told Dr. Mitchell during one session. Stories about his parents during the Depression, how he built his business values that shaped his approach to money. Conversations we should have had years ago if my parents hadn't created this artificial financial division. These talks with Grandpa Harold provided context I'd never had before, a fuller understanding of my family legacy beyond the betrayal that had defined recent months. Money is just a tool, Jessica, he told me one afternoon as we reviewed investment strategies for the remaining trust. Like any tool, its value depends entirely on how it's used. Gradually, I rediscovered purpose in my teaching career. The classroom had always been my sanctuary, but during the worst of the legal battles, even that joy had been temporarily dimmed. Now, with financial pressures lifted, I found renewed creativity and energy for my students. This experience even shaped my approach to teaching. I developed age-appropriate financial literacy activities for my fourth graders, helping them understand basic concepts about saving and responsible spending. Miss Parker, is being rich better than being poor? One student asked during these lessons. Having enough is important, I replied carefully. But what you do with what you have matters more than how much you have. My colleague Ryan, who had been supportively patient throughout this ordeal, despite my vague explanations for my absences and distraction, gradually became a closer friend. Unlike family members who demanded immediate forgiveness and reconnection, he respected my need to process at my own pace. Financial trauma is still trauma, he noted during one of our after-school coffee meetings. Anyone who expects you to just get over it doesn't understand what you've been through. His perspective was refreshing after months of family members pressuring me to move forward for everyone's sake. 3 months after the settlement, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and right, establishing a small educational foundation with a portion of the recovered funds. The Jessica Parker Educational Opportunity Fund would provide scholarships to students facing financial barriers to higher education, turning my painful experience into something constructive. I spent years believing financial struggles were simply my reality. I explained to Richard Bennett as we set up the foundation. Now I can help others facing similar barriers, but without the resources I ultimately discovered. Richard, who had become something of a mentor during this process, helped structure the foundation to maximize its impact while ensuring sustainable management. My mother predictably criticized this decision. After everything, you're just giving money away. That proves how financially irresponsible you are. I no longer allowed such comments to affect me. Actually, it proves I understand something you never did, that wealth carries responsibility beyond personal gain. As months passed, I developed a healthier relationship with money, neither fearing it nor being defined by it. The financial security I now experienced wasn't about luxury purchases or status symbols, but about freedom from constant worry and the ability to make choices based on values rather than necessity. I'm finding a middle path, I told Dr. Mitchell, between the artificial scarcity my parents created and the entitlement they claimed to be protecting me from. This new perspective extended beyond finances. I began carefully rebuilding select family relationships where genuine remorse and respect for boundaries existed. With others, particularly those who continued minimizing the betrayal, I maintained necessary distance without animosity. The healing wasn't complete, perhaps it never would be entirely, but 6 months after the legal resolution, I found myself standing on increasingly solid ground, looking toward a future shaped by hard-earned wisdom rather than defined by betrayal. 1 year after discovering the trust fund, I sat alone in my condo staring at the date on my phone calendar. The anniversary hadn't consciously registered until I found myself unusually irritable with students all day snapping at small disruptions that normally wouldn't bother me. Trauma anniversaries are real, Dr. Mitchell had warned me. Your body remembers even when your conscious mind doesn't. The year had brought significant progress and healing, but unexpected emotional aftershocks still occurred. Certain triggers, a passing comment about financial responsibility, family gatherings, even seeing my parents' car model on the street, could instantly transport me back to the moment of discovery and betrayal. I'd developed coping mechanisms for these moments: deep breathing, grounding techniques, journaling. Still, the anniversary hit particularly hard, bringing waves of anger I thought I'd processed months ago. That evening, I received an unexpected text from my father. "I know what today is. I'm thinking about you and the pain we caused. I'm so sorry, Jessica. The simple acknowledgement, recognizing the significance of the date without making excuses or demands, felt meaningful in ways I hadn't anticipated. We'd established a tentative relationship over recent months. Unlike my mother, who still oscillated between defensive justifications and performative remorse, my father had consistently respected my boundaries while demonstrating genuine accountability. I agreed to meet him for coffee the following weekend. Just him, not my mother. We sat at an outdoor cafe table, the autumn sunshine belying the emotional weight of our conversation. I've been doing a lot of work in therapy, he began after initial pleasantries. Understanding why I made the choices I did. It wasn't just about money. I listened, cautiously wary of excuses, disguised as explanations. I grew up with nothing, he continued. My parents, your grandparents on my side, were always one paycheck from disaster. There was never enough. When I married your mother, her family had more stability, but her parents were extremely controlling with money. He described patterns I'd never fully understood: his childhood poverty, creating persistent financial insecurity, my mother's family using money as control, their combined dysfunctional relationship with finances, eventually corrupting their ethic. None of that excuses what we did to you, he emphasized, meeting my eyes directly. But I want you to know it was never about not loving you or not valuing you. It was about my brokenness, our brokenness around money. You watched me struggle for years, I said quietly. Working those jobs, stressing about loans. How could you do that if you loved me? He didn't look away from the difficult question. We told ourselves stories to justify it. That struggle was building your character. That you'd become entitled with too much money. That we deserved compensation for raising you. His voice broke. They were lies we told ourselves to justify inexcusable behavior. I have no defense, Jessica. Something about his complete lack of defensiveness disarmed my practiced responses. Your mother still can't fully face what we did, he admitted. Her pride won't let her acknowledge the magnitude of our betrayal. But I can't hide from it anymore. This conversation marked a turning point in my healing journey, not instant forgiveness, but a deeper understanding of the complex human failures that had led to my betrayal. It didn't excuse what happened, but it helped me contextualize it within a multi-generational pattern of financial dysfunction. My own relationship with money continued evolving. Initially, after gaining control of the trust, I'd been almost paralyzed by financial decisions, second-guessing every purchase and investment. I don't trust myself, I admitted to Richard Bennett during a quarterly review meeting. I'm afraid of making poor choices with this money. That's understandable given your experience, he replied. But remember, financial literacy is a skill that can be learned, not an inherent trait. Under his guidance, I gradually developed confidence in making informed financial decisions, distinguishing between healthy caution and fear-based avoidance. I educated myself about investments, sustainable spending, and philanthropic impact. Unlike my parents, who had used money to project an image and fill emotional voids, I sought to align financial decisions with authentic values. My lifestyle remained relatively modest compared to what the trust could support, not from deprivation, but from thoughtful choice. Grandfather's 86th birthday gathering in April provided another milestone in family healing. The celebration was smaller than previous years, with several relatives still uncomfortable around me after I'd refused to let bygones be bygones without accountability. My parents attended our interaction, civil but constrained. My mother maintained physical and emotional distance, while my father made genuine efforts to engage appropriately. The tension was palpable but manageable, a new normal I was learning to navigate. Grandfather seemed to take particular joy in our strengthened relationship, sharing family stories and wisdom that connected me to a heritage beyond the recent betrayal. You remind me of my mother, he told me as we looked through old photographs. She had the same resilience, the same clear-eyed perspective about people. These new traditions and connections helped replace the broken ones, allowing me to salvage aspects of family identity while discarding toxic dynamics. My personal growth extended beyond family relationships. After months of focusing almost exclusively on legal proceedings and emotional recovery, I finally took the European trip I'd dreamed about since college. A 3-week exploration of art and history I'd once thought would remain permanently out of reach. Standing in front of paintings I'd previously only seen in textbooks, I experienced a profound sense of reclamation. This wasn't just a vacation, it was tangible evidence that my life was no longer constrained by artificial limitations. Returning from Europe, I cautiously began dating again after a long period of self-imposed isolation. Trust came slowly with careful boundary setting and gradual disclosure about my family situation. My friendship with Ryan, my teaching colleague, deepened during this period. Unlike others who grew uncomfortable with the complexity of my family situation, he provided consistent support without judgment or expectations. "I admire how you've handled all this," he told me during a school planning day. "Most people would have either completely cut off their family or caved to pressure to sweep everything under the rug. You've found a more nuanced path." His perspective helped me recognize my own growth, the developing ability to hold complex, sometimes contradictory truths about the people who had both loved and betrayed me. This developing capacity for nuance was tested when my mother experienced an unexpected health crisis in late summer. A severe gallbladder infection required emergency surgery followed by a complicated recovery. My father called clearly uncertain whether I'd want to know. "I understand if you don't want involvement," he said, "but I thought you should be informed." The situation presented a complex emotional challenge: how to show basic human compassion without reverting to unhealthy family patterns. With Dr. Mitchell's guidance, I established clear boundaries around my involvement, visiting briefly at the hospital, helping coordinate practical matters, but maintaining emotional distance from my mother's attempts to use the situation to force reconciliation without accountability. "You can choose compassion without surrendering boundaries," Dr. Mitchell reminded me. "They're not mutually exclusive." Navigating this situation, offering appropriate support while protecting my own well-being, represented significant growth from the people-pleasing patterns that had characterized my pre-discovery life. Throughout this year of healing and recalibration, Ryan's friendship provided a safe space for processing complex emotions. Unlike family members with vested interests or friends who grew uncomfortable with the situation's complexity, he offered consistent support without judgment. "Sometimes I worry I'll never fully trust people again," I confessed during a Saturday hike in early fall. "That I'll always be waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Trust isn't an all-or-nothing proposition," he replied thoughtfully. "Maybe healthy trust includes both openness and discernment." His perspective helped me recognize that my heightened awareness of human capacity for deception wasn't solely a wound, it was also wisdom earned through difficult experience. As the one-year mark of my discovery passed, I found myself in a significantly different place than I could have imagined during those first devastating weeks. The betrayal no longer defined my daily existence, though it had permanently altered my understanding of family trust and resilience. I was creating a new narrative, not erasing the betrayal, but refusing to let it be the end of my story. 2 years after discovering the trust fund, I stood in front of my 4th grade classroom as lead teacher, a position I'd earned through dedication and innovative curriculum development. The promotion had come with increased responsibility and a modest salary bump, financial changes that once would have seemed monumentally important, but now registered as just one aspect of a fulfilling career. My life had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. The obvious changes: a comfortable home, freedom from financial anxiety, professional advancement were significant. But the internal evolution proved more profound, a hard-won wisdom about human nature, a deeper understanding of authentic versus superficial connections, and a clearer sense of personal values independent of family expectations. The remaining trust funds, now properly managed with quarterly reviews and thoughtful planning, provided security without defining my identity. After the initial recovery and legal settlements, approximately $1.8 million remained carefully allocated between retirement savings, moderate lifestyle support, and the educational foundation I'd established. That foundation had become an unexpected source of purpose and healing. The Jessica Parker Educational Opportunity Fund had already provided scholarships to 8 students facing financial barriers to higher education, with particular focus on future teachers from disadvantaged backgrounds. "When something painful happens, we can't change the past," I told the scholarship recipients at our first annual dinner. "But we can transform how that experience shapes the future for ourselves and others." This philosophy guided my approach to family reconciliation as well. My relationship with my parents had settled into a careful, limited pattern. My father, having completed his legal obligations and continuing therapy, maintained consistent respect for my boundaries, while demonstrating genuine remorse. Our monthly coffee meetings had become a space for authentic, if sometimes difficult, connection. I never thought we'd reach this point, he acknowledged during a recent conversation. There were days I was certain I'd lost you forever. I wouldn't have blamed you. There were days I thought that too, I admitted. My mother's journey proved more complicated. Her initial defiance had gradually softened as the family and social consequences of her actions became unavoidable. The performative apologies eventually gave way to moments of genuine reflection, though her pride still created barriers to full accountability. She's doing the best she can with who she is, my father explained. The shame is almost unbearable for her. I'd learned to accept this reality without either excusing her behavior or carrying resentment that only damaged my own well-being. We maintained minimal, structured contact family gatherings, occasional brief conversations with clear boundaries against financial discussions or manipulation attempts. My grandfather, now 87, had become a true mentor and friend. Our weekly visits continued filled with family stories, financial wisdom, and perspective that transcended the betrayal that had initially brought us closer. The greatest legacy isn't money, he told me recently. It's integrity. Something your parents forgot, but you never lost, even when tested in ways most people never face. His pride in my resilience meant more than any financial inheritance could. The educational foundation work had connected me with Diana Reeves beyond our original legal relationship. She now served on the foundation board, helping navigate the legal and financial aspects of our growing impact. What you've created from this situation is remarkable, she observed during a recent planning meeting. Most clients in similar circumstances remain stuck in anger for years, even decades. I still have moments of anger, I admitted. But it no longer dictates my choices. This hard-won perspective extended to all aspects of life, particularly my relationship with Ryan, which had gradually evolved from collegial friendship to romance over the past year. Unlike previous relationships where I'd hidden family complications for fear of judgment, Ryan knew my full story and had witnessed much of the aftermath firsthand. What I admire most is your capacity to seek justice without surrendering to bitterness, he told me one evening as we walked along the riverfront. That's rare. Building trust came slowly for me now, a deliberate choice rather than automatic assumption. But with Ryan, the careful opening of my life and heart felt worthy of the vulnerability it required. My approach to teaching had transformed as well. Beyond the standard curriculum, I integrated age-appropriate lessons about integrity, consequences, and resilience concepts my students absorbed through stories and activities rather than didactic instruction. Miss Parker, is it always wrong to tell lies? A student asked during a class discussion on character development. What do you think? I redirected thoughtfully. Maybe tiny lies to protect someone's feelings are okay, she suggested. Like saying you like a bad drawing. That's called kindness, another student countered. Real lies hurt people. I guided these conversations carefully, helping students develop ethical frameworks without imposing my personal experiences directly. Creating this safe space for them to process family and moral complexities fulfilled me professionally in ways I hadn't anticipated. My new home, purchased with trust funds the previous year, represented this life philosophy. Physically, a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom house with a garden and study space. Unlike my parents' home with its emphasis on appearances and status symbols, my place reflected authentic priorities, warmth, functionality, and space for meaningful connections. It was in this home that I hosted a small gathering to mark the 2-year anniversary of the trust discovery, not to commemorate the betrayal, but to celebrate the journey toward healing with the people who had supported that process. Ryan, my grandfather, Dr. Mitchell, Richard Bennett, Diana, and select friends who had demonstrated true loyalty during the crisis. 2 years ago today, I thought my world was ending. I told them as we shared dinner in my backyard garden. I couldn't imagine finding purpose or joy again after such profound betrayal. My grandfather raised his glass. Instead, you found strength you didn't know you had. The path from betrayal to wisdom had been neither straight nor easy. It included legal battles, family fractures, emotional breakdowns, and painful reckonings with human capacity for both deception and growth. The journey hadn't ended. Certain triggers still activated grief or anger. Certain family gatherings still required careful emotional preparation. But standing among these authentic connections, I recognized the profound truth that had emerged from this ordeal. Our value lies not in financial resources or family mythology, but in the integrity with which we face life's inevitable, betrayals, and disappointments. The greatest gift from this experience I shared with my guests is learning that while we can't control what happens to us, we always have choices about how we respond, and those choices define us more than any betrayal ever could. As evening settled around us, conversations flowed with laughter and depth that would have been impossible in my previous life of surface-level connections and unacknowledged family dysfunctions. This, I realized, was true wealth: the freedom to build authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or pretense. The journey from devastation to reclamation had transformed not just my financial reality, but my entire understanding of success, family, and personal strength. The trust fund, both its discovery and betrayal, had ultimately revealed the most valuable inheritance of all: the capacity to create a life defined by integrity rather than circumstances. What about you? Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to unexpected growth or wisdom, or discovered something that completely changed how you viewed your past? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength through life's most challenging moments. Remember, sometimes our most painful experiences become the foundation for our greatest growth. Thank you for joining me on this journey.